Welcome to A Year of War and Peace. I'm your host, Brian E. Denton. A Year of War and Peace is a daily, year-long, chapter-by-chapter reading of and meditation on Leo Tolstoy's epic novel, War and Peace. In these videos and podcasts, you'll be treated to a free reading of one chapter per day of the novel, plus a reflective essay I've written individually tailored to that day's chapter. These readings are offered for free, though if you'd like to support me, you can do so in one of three ways. First, you could purchase my ebook, A Year of War and Peace. It features the entire novel, plus all of my reflective essays, and it's only $2.99 on Amazon.com. You could also become a patron at patreon.com/Brian E. Denton. If you sign up there, you'll receive a sonnet once a month, plus a link to an ebook of my collected sonnets. Finally, if you like, you can make a one-time donation to my PayPal account. The email there is brianedenton@gmail.com. You can also use that email to contact me. I'd be happy to hear from you. Your support is greatly appreciated. Today's reading and reflection is from chapter 287. Chapter 287. 4 weeks had passed since Pierre had been taken prisoner, and though the French had offered to move him from the men's to the officers' shed, he had stayed in the shed where he was first put. In burnt and devastated Moscow, Pierre experienced almost the extreme limits of privation a man can endure. But thanks to his physical strength and health, of which he had till then been unconscious, and thanks especially to the fact that the privations came so gradually that it was impossible to say when they began, he endured his position not only lightly, but joyfully. And just at this time he obtained the tranquility and ease of mind he had formerly striven in vain to reach. He had long sought in different ways that tranquility of mind, that inner harmony which had so impressed him in the soldiers at the Battle of Borodino. He had sought it in philanthropy, in Freemasonry, in the dissipations of town life, in wine, in heroic feats of self-sacrifice, and in romantic love for Natasha. He had sought it by reasoning, and all these quests and experiments had failed him. And now, without thinking about it, he had found that peace and inner harmony only through the horror of death, through privation, and through what he recognized in Karateev. Those dreadful moments he had lived through at the executions had, as it were, forever washed away from his imagination and memory the agitating thoughts and feelings that had formerly seemed so important. It did not now occur to him to think of Russia, or the war, or politics, or Napoleon. It was plain to him that all these things were no business of his, and that he was not called on to judge concerning them, and therefore could not do so. Russia and summer weather are not bound together, he thought, repeating the words of Karateev's, which he found strangely consoling. His intention of killing Napoleon and his calculations of the cabalistic number of the beast of the apocalypse now seemed to him meaningless and even ridiculous. His anger with his wife and anxiety that his name should not be smirched now seemed not merely trivial, but even amusing. What concern was it of his that somewhere or other that woman was leading the life she preferred? What did it matter to anybody, and especially to him, whether or not they found out that their prisoner's name was Count Bezukhov? He now often remembered his conversation with Prince Andrew, and quite agreed with him, though he understood Prince Andrew's thoughts somewhat differently. Prince Andrew had thought and said that happiness could only be negative, but had said it with a shade of bitterness and irony, as though he was really saying that all desire for positive happiness is implanted in us merely to torment us and never be satisfied. But Pierre believed it without any mental reservation. The absence of suffering, the satisfaction of one's needs and consequent freedom in the choice of one's occupation, that is, of one's way of life, now seemed to Pierre to be indubitably man's highest happiness. Here and now, for the first time, he fully appreciated the enjoyment of eating when he wanted to eat, drinking when he wanted to drink, sleeping when he wanted to sleep, of warmth when he was cold, of talking to a fellow man when he wished to, and to hear a human voice. The satisfaction of one's needs, good food, cleanliness, and freedom, now that he was deprived of all this, seemed to Pierre to constitute perfect happiness. And the choice of occupation, that is, of his way of life, now that it was so restricted, seemed to him such an easy matter that he forgot that a superfluidity of the comforts of life destroys all joy in satisfying one's needs, while great freedom in the choice of occupation, such as freedom as his wealth, his education, and his social position had given him in his own life, is just what makes the choice of occupation insolubly difficult and destroys the desire and possibility of having an occupation. All Pierre's daydreams now turned on the time when he would be free. Yet subsequently, and for the rest of his life, he thought and spoke with enthusiasm of that month of captivity, of those irrevocable, strong, joyful sensations, and chiefly of the complete peace of mind and inner freedom which he experienced only during those weeks. When on the first day he got up early, went out of the shed at dawn, and saw the cupolas and crosses of the new covenant of the Virgin still dark at first, the hoarfrost on the dusty grass, the sparrow hills, and the wooded banks above the winding river vanishing in the purple distance. When he felt the contact of the fresh air, and heard the noises of the crows flying from Moscow across the field, and when afterwards light gleamed from the east, and the sun's rim appeared solemnly from behind a cloud, and the cupolas and crosses, the hoarfrost, the distance and the river, all began to sparkle in the glad light, Pierre felt the new joy and strength in life, such as he had never known before. And this not only stayed with him during the whole of his imprisonment, but even grew in strength as the hardships of his position increased. That feeling of alertness and of readiness for anything was still further strengthened in him by the high opinion his fellow prisoners formed of him soon after his arrival at the shed. With his knowledge of languages, the respect shown him by the French, his simplicity, his readiness to give anything asked of him, he received the allowance of 3 rubles a week made to the officers. With his strength, which he showed to the soldiers by pressing nails into the walls of the hut, his gentleness to his companions, and his capacity for sitting still and thinking without doing anything, which seemed to them incomprehensible, he appeared to them a rather mysterious and superior being. The very qualities that had been a hindrance, if not actually harmful to him in the world he had lived in, his strength, his disdain for the comforts of life, his absent-mindedness and simplicity, here among these people gave him almost the status of a hero. And Pierre felt that their opinion placed responsibilities upon him. All right, so that concludes my reading of chapter 287. I will now proceed to my reflection on the same. A Year of War and Peace, day 287. Stoic so hard. Today, Pierre stoics. He stoics so hard. We've been weaving Stoic meditations into our reading for nearly 10 months now. Perhaps one reason it's been so easy is that the Stoics were very influential in Tolstoy's own life and work. We know this because he said so. Evidence appears in a list the great author drew up in response to a Petersburg publisher's request for comment on the books Russian writers considered the most influential. Among the books most influential to Tolstoy, enormously so according to his list, is the work of Epictetus. We see that influence today. The goal of Stoic philosophy, according to Epictetus, is to achieve eudaimonia in one's life. Eudaimonia he describes variously as happiness, flourishing, and tranquility of mind. Pierre achieves a measure of such tranquility of mind in this chapter. He does so by means of Stoic philosophy, whether he knows it or not. To begin with, we learn that Pierre has given up worrying about the things he has no control over. As he thinks back on Napoleon, politics, the war, his wife's adventures in adultery, he is almost embarrassed to admit how important those matters once seemed to him. It was plain to him, writes Tolstoy, that all these things were no business of his, and that he was not called on to judge concerning them, and therefore could not do so. This sentiment is straight out of the Stoic dichotomy of control and theory of indifference. Finally, It is important to note that Pierre learns these lessons in philosophy not through books or intellectual discussion, but rather through experience. His awakening is born of the privations of imprisonment, not the opulence of his library. Epictetus once wrote that the philosopher must prepare himself with practical hard winter training. Well, it's approaching winter time in Russia, and Pierre is a prisoner of war, suffering all the privations to be expected therein, and he'll soon be on a forced march west to boot. Though Pierre cannot be further from the old riches of his former life, it is in this new penury that he finds prosperity. Daily meditation. Nor does this take place only with regard to money and food, but every want which is caused by vice, and not by necessity, is of this nature. However much you supply it with, you do not quench it, but intensify it. He who restrains himself within the limits prescribed by nature will not feel poverty. He who exceeds them will always be poor, however great his wealth may be. Seneca, Of Consolation to Helvia. All right, so that concludes my reading of and reflection on chapter 287 of War and Peace. I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks so much for joining me. Remember that if you'd like to support me, you can do so either by purchasing the ebook A Year of War and Peace, becoming a patron at patreon.com, or making a one-time donation to PayPal. The links to all that are down below. You'll also find links to my Amazon wishlist for books and movies, and if you decide to support me by purchasing one of those, we'll set up a Zoom call and we'll talk about those books or those movies. Your support, no matter what you decide to do, is greatly appreciated, and also just thanks for listening. Tomorrow, we're going to be reading and reflecting on chapter 288 of War and Peace. I hope you'll join me. Until then, take care of yourselves and others.